September 12, 1958. 11:47 p.m. Lennox Lounge, Harlem. 300 people packed into one room. Music playing, glasses clinking, deals being made. The kind of night where nobody expects history to show its face. Behind one man's chair stood the person he trusted most. His bodyguard, his brother, the man who had taken bullets for him. The man everyone believed would die before letting harm touch Bumpy Johnson. That man raised a gun, aimed it at the back of Bumpy Johnson's head. Point blank, no hesitation, no warning. He pulled the trigger. Click. No gunshot, no scream, no chaos. Just one sound that sucked the air out of the room, a silence so heavy it froze Harlem in place. And what happened next didn't just save Bumpy Johnson's life. It changed the rules of power forever. Before we dive deeper, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Harlem in the late 1950s was under pressure from every direction. Rent was high, jobs were scarce, police harassment was constant, and outside forces were circling like vultures. Power wasn't just about money back then, it was about survival. Every block had tension in it, every corner carried a decision. And in that pressure cooker of poverty and ambition, Harlem needed more than a gangster. It needed someone who understood its people. That someone was Bumpy Johnson. To outsiders, he was just another criminal name in police files. But inside Harlem, Bumpy was something else entirely. He was the man people went to when landlords tried to evict families who couldn't pay. He was the man who made phone calls when businesses were shaken down or unfairly raided. He was the one who kept order when chaos threatened to tear the neighborhood apart. Bumpy didn't just take from Harlem, he invested in it. The Italian mob never understood that. They thought Harlem could be controlled the same way every other neighborhood was controlled, with fear, with muscle, with blood. They sent enforcers, they sent threats, they sent politicians and bribes, but none of it worked, because fear only lasts as long as the gun is pointed. And the moment the gun disappears, so does obedience. Harlem had lived under fear for too long to bow to it again. The real money was in numbers. Nickels and dimes placed by poor people dreaming of one lucky break. Small bets that added up to millions every year. The Italians wanted that money, every cent of it, but the numbers game survived on trust. People didn't hand over their last dollar to men they hated. They handed it to men who looked out for them. And Bumpy made sure Harlem felt protected, not exploited. Bumpy didn't rule Harlem with fear alone. He ruled it with respect. Respect built over years. Respect earned by standing between his people and those who wanted to feed on them. That's why the Italian mob couldn't control Harlem. Not because they weren't powerful, but because they didn't understand the one thing Bumpy understood better than anyone. In Harlem, power didn't come from terror. It came from loyalty, and loyalty couldn't be bought at gunpoint. By the late 1950s, the Italian mob had a problem they couldn't solve. Money was leaking out of their pockets every single day. Harlem's numbers racket was pulling in millions from small bets, nickels, dimes, loose change that somehow turned into serious power, and none of it was flowing into Italian hands. For the 5 families, that wasn't just an insult. It was unacceptable. They tried violence first. Enforcers were sent north with orders to intimidate, break legs, send messages, but the men they sent didn't come back walking. Some came back in ambulances, others didn't come back at all. Harlem didn't scare easily, and every time force was used, the neighborhood tightened its loyalty around one man, Bumpy Johnson. When violence failed, they tried politics, backroom deals, paid officials, police pressure, raids designed to choke operations slowly. But Bumpy had deeper roots, better connections, and something the Italians underestimated: community backing. Every push from the outside only made him stronger on the inside. Then came the bribes, suitcases of cash, quiet offers, promises of partnership, territory sharing agreements that worked everywhere else. But Harlem wasn't everywhere else. Bumpy didn't sell his people out, and without his cooperation, the numbers racket couldn't be controlled, because the streets didn't answer to Italians, they answered to him. That's when the 5 families finally understood the truth. Bumpy Johnson couldn't be touched from the outside, not with guns, not with money, not with politics, so the conversation changed. The tone got colder, more calculated, and someone finally said the words that would change everything. So we stop fighting him, and we turn someone he trusts. Big Sam wasn't just muscle, he was presence. 6'4", 260 pounds. Quiet. Watchful. The kind of man who didn't need to speak to make a room feel different. For 5 years he stood beside Bumpy Johnson through raids, wars, funerals and victories. He took bullets meant for Bumpy. Twice, he slept outside doors. Walked a step behind everywhere they went. In Harlem, loyalty like that wasn't questioned. It was assumed permanent. But loyalty gets heavy when life starts asking questions it can't answer. Sam had a daughter, young, sick, tuberculosis eating away at her lungs one breath at a time, hospital bills stacked higher every month, doctors talking in careful tones, charity wards, waiting lists. Sam watched his child struggle to breathe while he stood guard for a king who seemed untouchable, and no amount of respect stopped the numbers on those bills from growing. The Cadillac came on an ordinary afternoon. Black, clean, out of place on the block. The window rolled down, and a man smiled like he was selling insurance, not death. He said Sam's name like they were already friends. 5 minutes. Just hear me out. Sam should have walked away. But curiosity mixed with desperation is dangerous. So he got in. The offer was clean and cruel at the same time. $50,000. Enough to erase every medical bill. Enough to move his family somewhere clean, somewhere his daughter could breathe. All for one moment, one pull of a trigger, one betrayal. And when Sam hesitated, the truth came out cold and sharp. Loyalty doesn't pay hospital bills. Those words stayed with him because they weren't wrong. For 3 nights, Sam didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling thinking about duty, about honor, about the man who trusted him with his life. Then he thought about a child gasping for air, about a future that might not exist if he did nothing. Survival and betrayal sat on opposite sides of the same choice. And in the end, Sam picked the one that felt like saving his family, even if it meant destroying himself. Sam took the money. Not all at once, not proudly. He carried it like weight, like something that pressed into his chest every time he opened the briefcase. $50,000 stacked neatly in silence. Enough to save a life. Enough to end one, too. When he called back and said yes, his voice didn't shake, but his hands did. The deal was simple now. One place, one time. September 12th. Lennox Lounge. Friday night. Predictable. Routine. Perfect. They laid it out clean. Walk in like always. Wait until the moment feels normal. One shot to the back of the head. No drama. No noise. Disappear into a new life before sunrise. Sam nodded through the instructions, even though no one could see him. He told himself it would be fast. He told himself Bumpy wouldn't feel a thing. He told himself this was survival, not betrayal. As the days passed, Sam played his role perfectly, still loyal, still close, still trusted. He stood behind Bumpy Johnson like he had 1,000 times before, laughing when others laughed, watching doors, checking corners. Every step closer to September felt heavier, but Sam believed one thing kept him safe. He believed no one knew. What Sam didn't know was that before he ever got in that car, before the briefcase, before the promise of escape, Bumpy Johnson already knew. Bumpy Johnson didn't survive Harlem by trusting luck. He survived by knowing everything before it happened. Bartenders, cab drivers, shoeshine boys, janitors, people no one ever noticed. They all talked to Bumpy, not because they were scared, but because they were loyal. And one of those people saw something small that meant everything. A black Cadillac parked outside Big Sam's building. A man Sam didn't know stepping inside. 5 minutes later, Sam came back out. That was all it took. Bumpy could have ended it right there. One call, one quiet disappearance. That's how things were usually handled. But Bumpy wasn't usual. He watched Sam instead, watched the shaking hands, the tired eyes, the weight sitting on a man who'd made the wrong choice for what felt like the right reason. Bumpy understood desperation better than anyone, and he made a decision that shocked even his closest people. He wasn't going to kill Sam. He was going to teach him. The plan wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was precise. Bumpy called a gunsmith he'd trusted for years and asked for something strange. A gun that looked perfect, felt perfect, weighed perfect, but didn't fire. No bullet, no strike. Just a harmless click, a weapon that would betray the betrayer. Within days it was ready. Timing was everything. Bumpy sent Sam across town on an errand he couldn't rush. While Sam was gone, Bumpy walked into his apartment like he'd done 100 times before. He knew where the gun was kept. He always knew. The real weapon came out. The dummy went in. Nothing looked disturbed, nothing felt wrong, and Sam never noticed the difference. Why wait? Why let the trigger get pulled? Because killing Sam quietly would have solved nothing. The Italians would have found someone else. The cycle would have continued. Bumpy needed witnesses. He needed the betrayal exposed. He needed Harlem and the mob to see the same thing at the same time. That loyalty couldn't be bought, and that every move against him was already anticipated. Bumpy didn't play checkers. He played chess, 3 moves ahead. Lennox Lounge was alive that night. Jazz floated through the room like smoke. Laughter bounced off the walls. Politicians leaned in close. Hustlers whispered futures into glasses of cognac. 300 people packed shoulder to shoulder, believing they were just another Friday night in Harlem. Nobody knew they were sitting inside a moment that would become legend. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual corner table, grey suit pressed sharp, fedora resting beside him, a glass untouched in front of his hand. He looked relaxed, focused on conversation, back turned to the room. Open, vulnerable, exactly the way Sam had seen him 100 times before. Big Sam entered like he always did. No rush, no nerves on the surface. He moved through the crowd unnoticed because he belonged there, because his presence was normal, expected. His hand stayed inside his jacket, gripping the gun he believed would change everything. Each step closer tightened something in his chest. But he didn't stop. He closed the distance, slowly. 6 feet, 4, 2. The bartender saw the gun first, eyes widening. Breath caught in his throat, but before a sound could escape him, Sam raised the weapon, aimed at the back of Bumpy's head, and pulled the trigger. Click! The sound wasn't loud, but it swallowed the room whole. The band froze mid-note. Voices died halfway through sentences. Glasses stopped mid-air. 300 people turned at once, staring at Sam, at the useless gun in his shaking hand, at Bumpy Johnson sitting perfectly still. Bumpy lifted his glass, took a slow sip, set it down gently, then turned in his chair, unhurried, calm, eyes locking onto Sam's, and after a long pause, he spoke 5 words. "I've been counting on you." Sam's strength vanished in seconds. The gun slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. His knees buckled. The weight he'd been carrying for weeks finally crushed him. 300 people watched a giant of a man break down in front of them, not from bullets, but from truth. Bumpy Johnson didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't move fast. He let the silence do the work. Then he spoke calmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. He said he knew about the daughter, knew about the hospital, knew about the bills, and that was when he reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table, paid in full, every bill, handled before the trigger was ever pulled. That was the moment the room understood what real power looked like. Bumpy hadn't just stopped an assassination, he exposed it, publicly. He let everyone see what betrayal looked like, let everyone see what mercy looked like too, because killing Sam would have been easy. Letting him live with his choice was harder, and far more painful. Bumpy looked at Sam one last time, not with anger, but with disappointment, and he said the words that cut deeper than any gunshot. "You chose money over brotherhood, now live with it." There was no argument, no defense, just a man realizing the cost of the deal he thought would save him. Sam wasn't killed that night. He was erased, exiled from Harlem, stripped of name and place, allowed to walk out alive carrying nothing but shame. And everyone in that room learned the same lesson. Fear can control a moment, but mercy controls memory. And that night, Bumpy Johnson proved that mercy, when used right, was the most terrifying power of all. What happened at Lennox Lounge didn't stay in that room. By sunrise, the story was everywhere, whispered in back rooms, passed through payphones, carried from Harlem to Brooklyn, from the Bronx to Manhattan. By morning, every serious player in New York knew the same thing. A hit had been attempted on Bumpy Johnson, and it had failed in the most humiliating way possible. The 5 families called an emergency meeting before the day was over. Doors closed, voices raised, fury aimed inward, not at Bumpy, but at the men who thought they could outsmart him. The truth was undeniable now. Violence didn't work. Money didn't work. Even turning his own people didn't work. Every move against him had already been anticipated. That meeting ended with a decision no one expected. Harlem was off limits. No more pressure, no more contracts, no more attempts. The cost was too high, the message was too clear, and pushing further would only expose more weakness. It was the first time the mob backed down, without a shot being fired. People think power comes from violence, from guns, from who can pull the trigger first. But that night proved something different. Real power doesn't shout. It waits, it listens, it watches, and when the moment comes, it's already won. Bumpy Johnson survived not because he was the most feared man in the room, but because he was the most informed. He knew who was loyal, who was desperate, who was watching, and who was talking. Information kept him alive long before any gun ever could. Anticipation always beats reaction. Reacting means you're late, means someone else set the rules. Bumpy never reacted. He predicted. Every move against him was already accounted for, every betrayal already priced in. That's why the trigger click mattered more than a gunshot, because by the time Sam pulled it, the outcome was already decided. The most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's knowing what's coming, and that knowledge allowed Bumpy Johnson to turn assassination into lesson, betrayal into warning, and fear into respect. That's why he lived when others didn't, not because he was lucky, but because he was always 3 moves ahead. What happened that night didn't end when the music started playing again. It lived on in stories, in warnings, in the way people moved through Harlem after that. Because everyone understood something had shifted. Power had spoken without raising its voice. And it had been heard far beyond Lennox Lounge. Bumpy Johnson went back to his table, finished his drink, and kept being exactly who he'd always been. The man who couldn't be rushed, couldn't be bought, couldn't be surprised. While others chased fear and blood, Bumpy built something stronger, respect that lasted. If this story hit you the way it hit Harlem that night, tap that like button. Subscribe if you want real stories, not fairy tales. Drop a comment and tell me the truth. Would you have let Sam walk out alive, or would you have handled it differently? Because in Harlem, respect wasn't given. It was earned, and Bumpy Johnson earned every ounce of it.